Hey everyone, how's it going? I am so excited to make this video. Ever since I was a kid, I was fascinated by the fact that the gym leaders were restricted to just one type. And hilariously enough, the first challenges I really ever did in Pokemon were trying to beat the games with just one type at a time. Now, I've been able to incorporate a ton of red and blue content on this channel, but it's been difficult to do gold and silver or crystal. Not today. We're going to be trying to go through every single type and beating the game with just that type, but there's a twist. For the sake of Twitter and to make things a little bit more stressful, we're going to be doing this as a hardcore Nuzlocke. For those of you who don't know the rules of a hardcore Nuzlocke, here they are. We've talked about them in my intro videos where I've gone generation by generation, but this time around, restricting ourselves to one type is going to make it next level difficult. I'm really excited. This is being streamed always on my Twitch, and I've been having a ton of fun. Honestly, after years of playing Pokemon, I didn't think a challenge would ever get me as excited as this one has, but the idea that we might be able to beat almost every type like this, it's really cool, and it'll be an accomplishment, and I love these games. So let's start off with the type you're probably most familiar with in the early game, the normal type. So let's first start by talking about normal type. Normal type is unique. It is strong against nothing, but the only thing that normal is weak to is fighting. That's kind of helpful for a Nuzlocke that there aren't many Pokemon that have strong moves against us. However, it also has 0 resistances and only 1 immunity, Ghost type. Now, something else that kind of sucks about normal type, at least in this generation, is that most of the Pokemon that are normal type are either just normal or are normal flying. And at least normal flying takes away the fighting weakness. And the other Pokemon is normal psychic, Girafarig, and that's a big reason we're going to be doing this challenge in gold version. Usually for these challenges, I would recommend crystal version. There are a few reasons for this, but for the normal challenge to get Girafarig, which I do think is going to be clutch, I think gold version makes the most sense. And the reason gold over silver is that I think Teddy Ursa is a more valuable Pokemon than Meowth. So that's it for the introduction. Now let's talk about the run itself. In a normal Nuzlocke, it's very difficult to know what Pokemon you're going to get because there's just so many options, and if a Pokemon doesn't repeat often, there's a solid chance you might miss it. In this Nuzlocke, that's not the case. For better or for worse, we can pretty much ensure we get certain Pokemon at certain points, and that makes it easy to plan. And that's what I'm going to be telling you, my plan, how it evolved, how it changed, and how it went wrong. And hopefully we learn something about some Pokemon we might not see used all that often. Alright, so you're probably wondering, do you change the starter? No. These are being played with completely original. In fact, this is the Pokemon Gold my mom bought for me on my 9th birthday. So this is as legit as it gets, other than using the Retron because it has HDMI output and you can use some speed up. But it is being played off a cartridge, and we are going to be saving the cartridge for a reason I'll talk about at the end. But the starter we are going to pick is Totodile. Why? Because that ensures the rival picks Chikorita, and unlike in my solo runs, I'm making this as easy as possible for myself. Now, most Nuzlockes do not start until you get Pokeballs. Our Nuzlockes don't start until we get our quote-unquote starter Pokemon. So that's going to be on Route 29. There is a high chance it is a Sentret, and that would be ideal, because Sentret is only catchable on Route 29 or Route 1. We're not going to use Sentret. It is not fast, it is not strong, but it is nice to have because then we can use it for cut. Otherwise, you have to keep your starter around. The way non-normal Pokemon will work is that we can use them for HM purposes, but they can never appear in battle. If they get roared into, that's okay, they just can't attack. The same rules as a solo run. Ideally, we'd play a game that didn't have HMs, but that's the way it works, and I feel like it's a pretty fair compromise. Alright, another important thing is that we do want to be in the daytime. If we pick daytime, that means on Route 29 we can either get Rattata, Sentret, or Pidgey. Rattata is by far the least likely. If you get Rattata or Pidgey, that is less optimal, but it's not a big deal. We do want Sentret because the only place you can catch it is Route 29. Assuming you get Sentret, hope for a level 4 Pidgey on Route 30, and also hope that it is male. Why? because Generation 2, like Gen 1, is held together by duct tape and dreams. And the way Game Freak decided to determine whether a Pokemon is male or female is simply to look at its attack DV. These are like IVs, but they're out of 15 instead of 31. So for a 50-50 gender ratio like Pidgey, if its attack IV is between 8 and 15, it is male. If it is between 0 and 7, it is female. So for most physical attackers, we will hope for male Pokemon, but it is not the end of the world. Alright, so you would get Pidgey on Route 30, then you wouldn't get anything on Route 31. You have to beat youngster Mikey, so level 4 is a must, and equip a berry. That will be fine. Then you go to Sprout Tower, catch Rattata, and then we can change the time to nighttime. The way you do this, there is a website I will show you. All you need to do here, it's pretty cool. You put in your nickname, the money you have, and your trainer ID, and on the start screen you press select, B, and down. Make sure you don't press up because that deletes your save data. And that is how I originally found this, and thankfully once I learned how to use the internet, figured out how to change the time at will. For the record, while people say this isn't in Crystal version, it is. There is just a more complicated button combination. You still do initially press B, select, and down, but then you let go of B and down while keeping select pressed, and you press up, left. Then you release select. If you do that right, you will get this same menu. A little more annoying, takes a little bit of getting used to, but it is possible in every version. At nighttime, you will catch a Hoot on Route 31, and that will be your starting 4. If you got a Rattata or a Pidgey on Route 29, not a big deal. If it's a Rattata, you would get a Pidgey on Route 30. You don't have to go to Sprout Tower, so you would just change the time and get Hoot. And if you got Pidgey initially, then you could change the time right away and get a Rattata and a Hoot. You wouldn't have to go to Sprout Tower. So that gives you 3 Pokemon, but no matter what order or how many Pokemon you get these, make sure it is nighttime for this next step. And this is the worst step. The absolute worst step. The step where we get a Pokemon that is almost never used. I originally was going to use it as a meme, but actually completely rolls the first 3 gyms. I'm not kidding here. Dead serious. Dunsparce is amazing. It gets really bad towards the end of the game, but in the early game, it's really, really, really good. This is another reason we are playing in Gold version. In Crystal, you can get a Teddiursa in Dark Cave. Problem with Teddiursa is while Ursaring is a very good Pokemon, Teddiursa isn't, and there is a 50% chance Teddiursa runs away from you. And this is still a Nuzlocke. If a Pokemon runs away from you, you can't catch it. So, in a standard playthrough, yeah, maybe I would try for Teddiursa, but I think Dunsparce is well worth it for reasons you will see. The only problem is it's a 1% encounter rate, and while that's more likely than a shiny Pokemon, it can take anywhere from a few encounters to an hour, and that's at 4 times speed. I can't imagine doing this as a kid. Actually, I can. I did this. It is tedious, and it takes forever. You don't have repels, and you just have to hope you get it. Once you do, make sure your Pidgey's at level 5 and then spam Sand Attack because the only move Dunsparce uses is Rage, a move that we know very well from our Gen 2 Nuzlocke and the Minimum Battles Challenge, and it's part of the reason Dunsparce, like Totodile did in those videos, is outstanding for the first few gyms. Dunsparce can sweep your whole team, and you'd rather not lose any of these Pokemon, even though they're not really going to be used. So yeah, Sand Attack, you can level up your Pidgey, but that would waste time, and gotta go fast. And hopefully you catch a Dunsparce. Make sure you buy a bunch of Pokeballs too. But cool, we got Dunsparce. That's 5 Pokemon. Surely that's enough before we battle the very first gym leader. Nope. We are going to use Pidgey, we are going to use Dunsparce, and we're also going to use Jigglypuff, and this is why it has to be nighttime. Spearow can appear in the morning and daytime, and we don't want Spearow. We can catch it later on Route 33. The Pokemon we want is Jigglypuff, and the big reason for this is its move list. Jigglypuff can learn Ice Punch, Fire Punch, and Thunder Punch. These 3 TMs available in the Goldenrod Pokemart completely break the game. And if you have a Pokemon that can learn all 3, it really helps with coverage. And that's a big problem for normal Pokemon. We are only going to be using a Psychic type, a Flying type, and then Mono Normal. So having Pokemon with diverse movesets, very important. Clefairy would be better. Unfortunately, not obtainable till Kanto. That's going to be a recurring theme in these challenges. Really cool Pokemon, not available till the quote-unquote post-game. And these runs end at red, for the record. So, Jigglypuff's 5%, it just knows either Sing or Sing Defense Girl. And if it's male, because of its gender ratio, its attack will be between 11 and 15. Which isn't super important since we're going to use it as a special attacker, but still, pretty cool. Alright, that is the setup. Now we're ready for the execution. The next thing we're going to do is go into Sprout Tower to level up Jigglypuff via swap training and Pidgey. You can level up Dunsparce a little bit too. In fact, I battle both the bug catchers and youngster Joey with Dunsparce. He needs to be around level 6 before you fight Birdkeeper Abe. Ideally, Pidgey doesn't go to level 10. The level cap is 9, which is very low, and you can use Hoot Hoot and Dunsparce if things get dicey, but try to defeat all the sages. Sometimes this doesn't work out, things go wrong. Just don't lose a Pokemon, it's really frustrating. Alright, once you finish that off, that's not super important and can be skipped till later. All we're going to do is give Dunsparce a berry, and you can use Defense Curl against Birdkeeper Abe's level 9 Spearow. It's also at the level cap. You don't really have to, I wouldn't recommend it. And then just use Rage, Rage, and Rage. That's it. Give it a berry, use Rage, and Dunsparce obliterates. I didn't lose a single time. Not a single time. I did this, I don't know, if you were here in chat, you know I was on this challenge for weeks. And I didn't lose a single time to Falconer. I lost everywhere, but not to Falconer. Falconer is, with Dunsparce, very easy. And this team of primarily Jigglypuff, Dunsparce, and Pidgey is going to be the team we have for actually a really long time. We're not going to get new members until after we defeat Whitney. But don't you worry, this team is pretty darn good. Alright, so there isn't any more normal Pokemon to get on Route 32, and we can proceed to the Team Rocket section in Slowpoke Well, and eventually I mentioned on Route 33 you can get a Spearow. Might as well get that. It is a backup, and it will be super useful later, but for now we are on Team Pidgey. There are only so many flying Pokemon you can get. In fact, there are 4. Pidgey, Spearow, Doduo, which isn't available till pretty much the end of the game, and Togetic. What about Farfetch'd? We'll talk about that, but no. Farfetch'd will not be available. As for Bugsy, you can use Pidgey, but I recommend using Dunsparce. Spearow is far more consistent here. Hoot Hoot sucks. Don't use Hoot Hoot. But the reason we're using Pidgey will be revealed a lot later. This is a long game with Pidgey. It took me a really long time to decide which bird I was going to use, and trust me, Pidgey is by far the best bird. And I'm not kidding again, but the reason will be revealed a little bit later. Just use Rage against Metapod, Kakuna, and Scyther. That is the order it will always be, and you win. Then we have to fight Rival 2, the reason we picked Totodile, and that reason is because then Rival 2 has a Bayleaf. Theoretically, Pidgey can sweep. In fact, you need Pidgey unless you've taught Mudslap to Dunsparce or Jigglypuff to knock out the Ghastly. And then either Dunsparce, if things go awry, do equip Bitterberries because Zubat likes to confuse. And you can either use Rage Strats or Gust and Sand Attack to knock out the remaining 2 Pokemon. And that brings us to probably the scariest gym leader casually, Whitney. Thankfully, there are a lot of trainers around Whitney, but there actually aren't any good Pokemon. In Crystal version, you could catch a Snubble, but we're not in Crystal version, and unfortunately, the chance we catch a Snubble in this run is really low. So we're still stuck with this same team. You also can get an Eevee, but that wouldn't be until you actually defeat Whitney, and you can get a Ditto, and I will show you something funny that you can do with Ditto. Ditto's kind of interesting and gimmicky, but kind of useless in a Nuzlocke run, unless you are very bold. So, what's the strat for Whitney? We got a Pidgey. It'll evolve to Pidgeotto at level 18, except we're not going to do that. We have a Jigglypuff, and we don't have a Moonstone, so it'll be a Jigglypuff. And we have Dunsparce. And wouldn't you know, Dunsparce destroys Whitney, but we actually don't even need it. We can use Jigglypuff. The primary strat I used is get them all to level 20, use Sing with Quick Claw, which you get in the National Park, put the better Jigglypuff, aka Clefairy, to sleep, Defense Curl, roll out, and if you don't miss, the 4th hit will knock out Miltank, and there's no way you can lose unless you miss. If you do, the run could be in trouble, but this is where Pokemon like Rattata or Ditto can come in handy. You can just use them as sacrifices, then send out Dunsparce and start using Rage. That's the backup. It never actually happened in 30 attempts. Sometimes Jigglypuff would miss against Clefairy, and then I would swap in Dunsparce and just use Rage. Both strategies are extremely effective. You also could use Jigglypuff, knock out with Headbutt or something, and then use Ditto to transform into Miltank after putting it to sleep, and use Whitney's own Miltank against her. That was not done in a real run. That was me practicing and learning some strategy, but it is possible to do. So, you know, if you don't value your run, that's something you can do as well. But these 3 gyms at this point, after all these times, were actually really consistent due to Dunsparce. What a great Pokemon, carrying us through the run, and it's about to get retired. Because once we defeat Whitney, we open up Ecruteak City, but more importantly, Routes 38 and Route 39. They can be accessed immediately as soon as you get to Ecruteak City, and these routes have Pokemon that we can use. First things first, change the clock to nighttime. You do that, look at the encounters. There's Farfetch, that's only during the day. There's Snubbull, that's 1%. And then there's Miltank and Tauros. 2 of the best normal type Pokemon you can get, and they're available right here. They are kind of similar, but Miltank has decent speed and amazing bulk. Tauros has amazing speed, decent bulk, and amazing attack. Headbutt is available in the Pokemart. It's 70 base power with a chance to flinch. Not quite Body Slam, but discount Body Slam I will take. And these Pokemon just make the run totally not a breeze. There are still many pitfalls, including one that's coming up, but a lot better. You can get Stantler, although Stantler is just discount Tauros. You also can get Snubbull. My very first run, I actually got the 1% chance of Snubbull. And Snubbull just kind of fills a similar role to Jigglypuff. And I don't really like it, just because its attack is high, but it's too slow. Like Jigglypuff, it's not very good. Honestly, if I got a Snubbull, I might reset. It's just not worth it. Tauros and Miltank are going to be 2 of your hard carries. One of the most important concepts in a Nuzlocke is the pivot. The ability to save one of your Pokemon by swapping into another that can tank the attack. And Miltank knows Milk Drink, and it's bulky. Miltank is an amazing, amazing pivot. Heck, even Tauros is a really good pivot. These are going to be 2 of the most valuable Pokemon going forward, and if they faint before the Elite Four, I would strongly consider just trying again. Normal type Pokemon aren't outstanding, and these 2 make this run a heck of a lot more doable. So, the other thing you're going to want to do when you get these Pokemon is I have Thunder Punch or Fire Punch to teach Miltank. I recommend Thunder Punch for reasons we'll talk about in a second. And we're going to teach Tauros Surf, even though it has terrible special attack, because that will allow Tauros to destroy any rock ground Pokemon it encounters. There isn't a single one that can survive a Tauros Surf. Now we're going to go into the Lighthouse and level up. I frequently got aggressive and lost my Tauros or Miltank here, so be careful. Buy potions. Don't allow your Pokemon to faint due to critical hits. Be smart. Don't be me. Oh my god. Losing a run here to that was the most annoying thing. You have no idea. But after you finish all that, you're ready to take on Morty. Now, with Morty, there are a couple strategies. Pidgey can help. The problem is the Gengar can use Mean Look, and then it can put Pidgey to sleep and use Dream Eater. So you don't really want that. you actually need to kind of make sure Gengar can't put your Pokemon to sleep. So there are mint berries, but the other strategy is either to use Mud Slap with Pidgey, or better yet, dig Dunsparce. That's another option you have. Heck, you could even use Roll Out Jigglypuff. You just don't want to lose any Pokemon. Unfortunately, Gengar is fast, and if it decides to mean look the wrong Pokemon, it can be really bad. But nothing else other than the second Haunter with Mimic is really that big a deal. In this game, Mimic can only mimic the last move you used. So I did lose to Morty. Well, actually, I never lost to Morty, but I'd lose Pokemon to Morty. This is another reason to make sure Miltank and Tauros have Surf and Fire Punch, because you can get Morty in a cycle where he tries to use Hypnosis against a Pokemon that it thinks is awake, and he can try to use Dream Eater against a Pokemon that's asleep, and you can swap back and forth until he runs out of power points for Hypnosis and Dream Eater. Once that happens, Gengar is useless. I only ever actually did that one time, but there are many options, even using Dunsparce for one last hurrah. But after that is all done, the game can get really difficult, and this is where you need to be really smart. So, in theory, the next gym leader is Chuck. And although I've had them displayed in the bottom left, here are the level caps in case you're wondering. 9 for Falconer, we talked about. 16 for Bugsy, not a problem. 20 for Whitney, it worked out. 25 for Morty, that's fine, and then it goes up to 30 for Chuck. But the next one is Pryce at 31, and then Jasmine at 35, even though in theory, it's supposed to go Chuck, Jasmine, Pryce. But that doesn't make any sense because you always want to be increasing your level cap. Now, Chuck is the biggest roadblock, and if I was tired and wanting to end stream, Chuck was a good stopping point, because if we defeated Chuck, we were kind of home free for a little while, and if we lost, I mean, well, then the stream was over. So what makes Chuck so difficult? Well, obviously he's a fighting type gym leader, but it's not just that. Primeape isn't that big a deal, but Poliwrath is outstanding. It knows Surf, which is actually really good against most of my Pokemon. Dynamic Punch, which is a 50-50 shot of being a 100 base power fighting move, which is super effective against almost all the Pokemon I have. And then he has Hypnosis and can put my Pokemon to sleep. He is unbelievably good, and I would lose countless runs. My earliest strategy was to do something like this. I would get Girafarig up to level 30 and then try to sweep, but that doesn't work because Girafarig, even though you can get it towards the Lake of Rage, it doesn't actually sweep because it doesn't learn Psybeam until 41, which is actually after you defeat the 8th gym. So you're stuck with Confusion and a very mediocre special attack stat. And unless you get a critical hit, you will not knock out Poliwrath. Maybe if you gave it a ton of calciums, but that's a lot of investment and it's just not worth it. I tried using Noctowl. I tried using Fearow. But little did I know, the way to beat Chuck was a Pidgey. So, before I talk about Pidgey, I'm going to say right now that we're actually not going to battle Chuck. We're going to go get Girafarig, and then we're going to do the Team Rocket section. Actually, we're going to level up a little bit using Tentacool. You want Miltank to be around level 28, because Red Gyarados is one of the scariest things in this Nuzlocke. It's level 30, it knows Thrash, it knows Dragon Rage. You do not want to mess around with this thing. And it's right at the level cap. So, yeah, Miltank's the right choice. This is why we taught Thunder Punch. But Stomp or Headbutt, I would prefer Headbutt, would be fine as well. Once you either catch it, because it can learn Waterfall and Whirlpool and Surf, or defeat it and get 900 or so experience points, then it's time to do the Team Rocket section. The reason I say to do this now is because you don't want to risk over-leveling and having trouble with Pryce. It's good to know where your Pokemon are all going to be. And there's really nothing too difficult until you get to the Electrode. Miltank can tank a self-destruct, even a critical hit self-destruct. So you should have some potions because you need to heal between each Electrode. But yes, thank goodness for Miltank, because in some of these runs, these Electrode are a nightmare. Nothing else in this section really gave me too many issues. But after we defeat the Rocket Hideout, we then defeat Pryce. Either Tauros or Miltank will work, but they need to be high leveled enough. The biggest threat is the Piloswine. You can use Headbutt against Seal and Dugong, and if you're high leveled enough, it should be a 2-hit KO or maybe a 3-hit KO. But Piloswine won't be, and Blizzard has 5 power points and it can freeze. If it does, you better have a backup. If you don't, even though Piloswine is kind of bad, it can still sweep your entire team. After you defeat Pryce, make sure you don't get above level 30, because the level cap for Chuck is only level 30. And Chuck is going to be extremely difficult, considering we're using normal type Pokemon and Chuck uses fighting type Pokemon. Now, I spent a very, very long time trying to come up with the optimal strategy for Chuck. There are 2 basic options. First off, since we're playing Gold and Silver, Girafarig is Psychic, but unfortunately, it doesn't learn Psybeam in time, so it's not a consistent option against Poliwrath, and because it is part normal type, it is still going to do a lot of damage, the Poliwrath will, with Dynamic Punch. Far better to use, I realized, would be a flying Pokemon. But every flying Pokemon had a problem. Farfetch'd and Pidgeotto had bad stats. They also don't know any great moves. Neither does Sphero, although it has better stats. But unfortunately, I never was able to sweep Pryce. I would always lose the Pokemon, and Fearow can be pretty useful later. What I realized is that if you train up a Pidgey and delay evolution up until level 29, then that Pidgey will learn Wing Attack, and with Wing Attack, you should be able to one-shot Primeape and two-shot Poliwrath, and Dynamic Punch shouldn't knock you out. Now, sometimes Poliwrath likes to use Hypnosis. Had I known it does this, I could have equipped Mintberry, but if this happens, that's okay. Thankfully, Girafarig has a Bitterberry equipped. I can swap it in, and although I don't have Psybeam, as long as it doesn't crit, Confusion does knock it out. If you really want to spend a long time, you can level up Fearow, Noctowl, all those are possible. Farfetch'd, if you're going to use Tauros and Miltank, you can't get one, at least not in Gold and Silver. But I found the level 30 Pidgeotto was super consistent. Don't forget, I did this run like 25 times, so I really started to get to know what Pokemon worked and what Pokemon didn't. Speaking of which, Jasmine used to give me a lot of problems, but I also figured out a very consistent strategy for her. We haven't evolved Jigglypuff into Wigglytuff, even though we've had the opportunity for a while. As soon as you get Surf, you can go to Tojo Falls and get the Moonstone, but we need to wait until level 35. Why? Because that's when Jigglypuff learns Body Slam. And Body Slam is an excellent move for Wigglytuff, but it's actually not going to help versus Jasmine. Against Jasmine, what we're going to do is use Fire Punch. It's going to one-shot Magnemite, it's going to one-shot the second Magnemite, and it'll be a 2-shot against Steelix. If Steelix uses Iron Tail, you can just use Fire Punch, or you could swap out to Miltank or Tauros. But even with really bad luck, we were able to win very, very easily. Jasmine proved not to be too big a deal, and now we get to one of the most tedious sections of most runs, but in a type lock, it's kind of relaxing. I mean, being able to use just whatever Pokemon you want, not worrying too much about your Pokemon getting knocked out, and furthermore, being able to level them up more and more, because the level cap is now increased from 35 all the way up to level 40. There is one trainer that's a little scary. The fake director before you go to the underground, his Pokemon can self-destruct and knock out Girafarig. I did lose Girafarig once to that, but only once in 25 attempts. I cannot repeat this enough. Losing Girafarig is devastating. It is an exceptionally good Pokemon in a normal run. Do not lose it. The rival battle in the underground is actually not as bad as you think. Girafarig can take on the Golbat pretty nicely. If you've lost Girafarig, that's okay, because Tauros is really, really good. So is Miltank. Having both is just too much. Headbutt does a ton of damage, but even better, it has a chance to flinch. So even if you're not doing a lot of damage, you still have the chance to knock things out you shouldn't. If something goes wrong, you can always switch to the other of Tauros or Miltank. And of course, for Meganium, we can switch into our flying type, which for us is Pidgeotto. Hopefully, it'll get to level 36 and evolve into Pidgeot, but a lot of the time, I would lose my bird Pokemon before that happened, and it's annoying. There are really 3 good birds in this game: Pidgeot, Dodrio, which you can get later on, and Fearow. You just need one of them for the end game, but make sure you have at least one of them. The backups like Noctowl and Togetic, they're okay at best. Before you battle Claire, it's important to level up all your Pokemon because you really don't want to lose Pokemon to Claire. I mean, you don't want to lose your Pokemon to anybody, but you're so close to the Elite Four. Last thing you want to do is have your Pokemon faint. So are we going to use Wigglytuff with Ice Punch? Nah, that actually isn't the best strategy, surprisingly. There is another strategy that I think works far better, but of course, it's contingent on having a Pokemon, and you're not necessarily guaranteed to have it, but there are some backups if you don't. The Pokemon we're going to use is Miltank. And Miltank is exceptionally good versus Claire. How good? Well, we actually are going to lead with Wigglytuff, and we're going to try to put Dragonair to sleep with Sing. Yes, we're going to use Sing, and then Miltank, we use Defense Curl, which you should keep, and Rollout. And if Dragonair cooperates, Miltank should be able to sweep through the entire team. Unfortunately, my Miltank didn't have great attack, so we actually stopped rolling out at Kingdra. However, it's so bulky that we would have been able to knock it out. I was a little worried about ranges, and like I said, why lose a Pokemon? So I swapped into Tauros. Of course, I didn't realize Claire had a Hyper Potion, but Tauros is good enough that it didn't take any damage and 3-shot Kingdra. Realistically, you should be able to knock out the first Dragonair a little quicker, and the 5th rollout should hit Kingdra. But hey, when you have a good team, even when the first strategy fails, the backup usually works. Now, after this comes the worst part of every Nuzlocke run. We have to get our Pokemon to level 45 or level 46. The level cap is level 47 because that's Houndoom's level. If all our Pokemon faint, it's over, and unlike in the vanilla Nuzlocke, we have a pretty limited team. So we need to be very, very smart to not lose any of our Pokemon, most of which you want to use in Kanto. There are some backups, but you don't want to use them if you don't have to. So, what are the strategies? Rather than talking more generally, let me show you. But before I do, let me make a couple of notes. Number 1, there are 2 more Pokemon you can capture. You can catch a Doduo/Dodrio on routes 26 or 27, and that is a much better flying type than Pidgeot or Fearow. And you can catch in Victory Road an Ursaring, which is a pretty good normal type, and in some cases is a good backup. It's also a Pokemon you can have faint, because there are a lot of things that do the same thing Ursaring does, like Lefable, Wigglytuff, etc., although Ursaring has really good attack. The one other thing to mention is to remember the level cap falls before Kanto, so make sure you have a team of other normal Pokemon. Dunsparce, one of the other flying Pokemon you haven't used, just make sure you have something to get through. I highly recommend a flying Pokemon or 2 because we need to go through Rock Tunnel, and there's a trainer with a Machamp, and if you can't one-shot that Machamp, you will lose your run. I've lost 2 runs to that Machamp. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. How do we get past the Elite Four and make it to Kanto? Alright, after over an hour of leveling up all my Pokemon, we've only lost 2 in this run. Let's show you how I beat the Elite Four pretty consistently. So, Girafarig is very good against Will. It might not one-shot Will's Pokemon, and you can either use Return, which should replace Headbutt at this point, or Shadow Ball. The scariest Pokemon is probably Executor because of Leech Seed, but you can always swap out. Now, who do you swap into? Ursaring is usually a good call, because like we said, Ursaring, while useful, is replaceable. So if something happens, it's not a big deal. However, Will isn't too bad, and Girafarig should have a pretty easy time. You can also always swap into Tauros or Miltank, and they're extremely tanky as well. Overall, Will really shouldn't be a problem for a normal team like it would for a fighting or poison team, which I do want to try in the future. It sounds like it would be fun. Koga can be annoying, but if you know what you're doing, he's really not that big a deal. So, how do you defeat Koga? I recommend leading off with Dodrio, who I'm using as my flying Pokemon as I said. Drill Peck one-shots Ariados, which likes to set up Baton Pass and double team. That's no fun. For Fortress, Wigglytuff Fire Punch, although Ursaring also knows it, or can know it, that's pretty useful. Against Venomoth, Body Slam actually does more damage and has the chance to paralyze. You might not outspeed the Venomoth, but that's okay, it's usually not such a big deal. Against Muck, you can leave in Wigglytuff, or you can always swap into something else. Like I said, Miltank and Tauros are always pretty solid swap-ins, and if you're really concerned, you can swap in Ursaring. Swapping in Girafarig is not recommended, just because it isn't the bulkiest Pokemon, and it can get knocked out by Crobat or Muck, but it does do a lot of damage with Psybeam. So there is a give and take there, but this team, thanks to its good bulk and diversity, should be able to beat Koga no problem. If you're really worried, the TM for Swift is in this game, so you can have that, but overall, you should be fine. The scariest Elite Four member by far is Bruno, because he's a fighting type trainer. Listen, I make fun of Bruno, but he's good in this one. Dodrio can one-shot Hitmontop, but then Bruno will go into Onix. So here is where you need to be smart with your swap-in. You could swap in Tauros, which could use Surf, and I recommend Tauros having Surf because Miltank will have, well, you see, Defense Curl, Milk Drink Rollout, and Body Slam. But we swap in Miltank. Why? Well, that's because this is going to take a long time. Onix is not very strong, and we need a good swap-in for the next Pokemon, which is going to be a fighting Pokemon. This is Bruno's only rock Pokemon, and if we can get Dodrio against the fighting Pokemon, thus, it's important to get Onix's health as low as possible. It's very unlikely to use a rock move against a Miltank, and then you can knock it out with Dodrio, and Dodrio can sweep with Drill Peck. And this is why it's so good. It one-shots Machamp pretty much every time, although it can be arranged if you have a very weak Dodrio. My Dodrio does have bad attack IVs because attack IVs, you can tell if they're good or bad by what gender your Pokemon is. Kind of a weird thing, but it's the way Gen 2 works. But if you do that, Bruno is easy. It took me a while to figure that out. I used to lose Girafarig all the time to Bruno, but thanks to this new strategy, we don't need to worry. Karen's just a troll, which is why I lead with Ursaring, because if we're going to lose a Pokemon, like I keep saying, let it be Ursaring. It also can crit with Slash, and after you knock out Umbreon, what comes out next is completely random. If Vileplume comes out, you can swap in Dodrio, though you don't want to see Stun Spore. Drill Peck usually will one-shot Gengar, but this Dodrio is pretty bad attack, so it didn't. That's unfortunate. Murkrow is pretty easy. The one you're most scared of is Houndoom. Now, the move I make in this particular run is unfortunate. I go for Tri-Attack, hoping it'll knock it out, and Houndoom gets a critical hit that I'm not sure it mattered. But if we swap something in like Tauros, there's a chance Tauros gets burned, then we swap in Miltank, you can lose a bunch of Pokemon. Losing Dodrio sucks, but there are backups for it. There aren't many backups for Tauros and Miltank, especially because Miltank is going to be our linchpin versus Lance. That's right, we have Pokemon with ice moves, and yet, once again, it's Miltank. And the strategy is the exact same you saw versus Claire. I don't even have an electric move on Wigglytuff this time, and that's actually an accident. You're supposed to set up against Dragonite, but I forgot to teach Thunder Punch. So instead, we're going to set up on Gyarados. This could ruin a couple of things, but it's not the end of the world. It's a 2-turn knockout as long as Gyarados doesn't wake up, and then you should outspeed and one-shot at least 2 Dragonite, and we actually one-shot Aerodactyl, although Charizard sometimes comes out next. Good thing it didn't, because Charizard is one-shot even by a first-turn rollout, and although a second-turn rollout won't one-shot the most powerful Dragonite, a third-turn will, and Miltank is bulky enough that even a critical hit won't knock it out. This took me many turns to figure out. I used to use Wigglytuff with the Elemental Punches, but it was too slow. Same thing with Ursaring in the Elemental Punches, but at the end of the day, what turned out to work is Miltank with Rollout. That takes us to Kanto, and unlike with the vanilla Nuzlocke, we really don't need to replace our whole team. There are a couple useful Pokemon we can get. One of the Pokemon is in Rock Tunnel, and that Pokemon is Kangaskhan. It is the only normal Pokemon there, so we can automatically catch it. It's going to be at a low level, but we'll level it up pretty quickly, and we're going to use it for the majority of the Kanto gyms. Another Pokemon we can get later is Clefable. It's pretty much the same thing as Wigglytuff, just better. And finally, you can get a Chansey on Route 13, 14, or 15 so long as you have a Pidgey. And Chansey, well, Blissey is a great special wall, but be very careful. I lost Blissey pretty much in every single run, because if it gets hit by a physical attack, it's doomed. I should note that Chansey is only a 1% encounter and can take forever to catch. I think it took me half an hour, which is terrible because you might not even use it. Against Janine, I recommend using Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan, it might be outsped, but Headbutt or Return, depending on whether or not you gave it a bunch of haircuts, it can work. Fearow, you can delay evolution to give it Drill Peck early, which I recommend, which is exactly what I did, are good ways to round out your team. You don't need 6 Pokemon at level 39, that just takes too long if you're not using rare candies. Unfortunately, you need to be careful with the Weezing. They can use self-destruct. Thankfully, Kangaskhan can learn Earthquake, and it's a pretty powerful attack. And yes, Kangaskhan is going to be our Earthquake user. Additionally, you can use Experience Share in order to prevent your Kangaskhan from leveling up too much. And because it's so powerful, it easily beats Janine, and that's not the only trainer it's going to run through. Soon enough, we'll get all our good Pokemon back, but for now, it's going to be the Kangaskhan show. If you don't have Kangaskhan, don't worry. There are other options. You can catch an Apom. You can use Dunsparce. You can use maybe Granbull if you caught one with a 1% chance. But Kangaskhan is the best. The level cap rises to 44, and technically the next gym leader you should battle is Brock, which is not a great matchup for Kangaskhan, but it's also not a terrible matchup because we know Earthquake. If you're really worried about Brock, you can go to Mount Moon and get a Clefairy first. I've done that before, but the rival battle there can be a little difficult at level 44, so just watch out. Kangaskhan should be good enough though. You can teach it Surf, and there is a move deleter, and that does one-shot Graveler and Rhyhorn. The Pokemon it won't one-shot, obviously, are Omastar and Kabutops. Earthquake is a 2-shot, but Kangaskhan is bulky enough, even though we've barely leveled it up, that you should be able to knock everything out. Onix isn't very scary, and as long as Kabutops doesn't get a critical hit or something, I mean, typically 2 Pokemon would need to get critical hits to knock out Kangaskhan, so Brock really isn't that bad, and we can move on to the next gym leader and or catch Clefairy if you want to. With Earthquake, we're getting close to using our regular Pokemon again, but Kangaskhan can actually usually sweep through Lieutenant Surge's team. By training it up to level 45, it should have enough speed to outspeed everything. In Generation 2, badge boosts are a thing, and because none of the gym leader's Pokemon have stat experience, it's really easy. Also, the website I used for Nuzlocking says the level cap's 45, but Electabuzz is clearly 46. I'm not sure why that mistake is there. Whatever, just something I noticed. The level cap goes up to level 47 for Misty, and depending on how much you leveled up your other Pokemon, you might be able to use some old friends, which is kind of nice. It's always fun when you can use the new team and the old team together. And against Misty, you can pretty much use whoever you want. In this battle, I used Ursaring, just because, as I've said many times, losing Ursaring is not the end of the world, but you can always swap into another Pokemon if things get dicey. Just make sure you don't lose Tauros, Miltank, or Kangaskhan. Those are pretty good, although truth be told, you might only want to use 2 of them going forward. They do fill similar niches, but they're all just so good. It's so hard to justify not using them. Now, you need to make sure Girafarig never went above level 48 because it does a good job versus Sabrina. Return or Shadow Ball should at least 1 or 2 shot most of her Pokemon, and their psychic moves don't do very much to you. You can always swap out if Espeon decides to be a troll and uses Sand Attack, or you could do what I do in this run and just stay in because it's not that big a deal. You should have enough bulky Pokemon that you can withstand Alakazam's attacks. And although I don't believe I have a Blissey, you could get Blissey by this point, and that completely walls Alakazam, which is why it's useful to use. I would recommend catching Chansey in a Friend Ball, but those take a really long time to get in Gold and Silver. You can only give Kurt 1 Apricorn at a time, and you can only get 1 per day, so even if you change the clock, it is a very lengthy procedure. I was never able to get a Blissey with a Friend Ball, and grinding up its friendship takes a really long time, but it would be worth it versus this battle if you are very concerned. Yo, it's Future J-Rose here. I forgot to mention the Erica battle. So the level cap for that is level 44, and this is why you want one flying Pokemon like Fearow still around. Makes it a complete joke. There's very little Erica's Pokemon can do to you. My Fearow is under-leveled, and it doesn't have good DVs. Obviously, Dodrio would be better, but it's easier to use Dodrio for the Elite Four, so it wouldn't be able to be used. Pidgeot works too. Heck, even Noctowl works. But yeah, not much to say, but I did forget Erica, so the meme continues. Alright, let's get back to actual notable trainers now. Okay, so now it's time to go and battle Blaine. The level cap for Blaine is 50, but we have a Surf Pokemon, we have an Earthquake Pokemon. It really isn't that bad. I do recommend Kangaskhan just because Tauros' special attack is so bad. Although Kangaskhan too can know Surf, but again, I recommend Earthquake. If Kangaskhan is high level enough, Earthquake should one-shot Magcargo. You should be able to outspeed Magmar in one shot with Earthquake. Rapidash you might not outspeed depending on your level, and it also might not be a one-shot, but even a Fire Blast, a crit, shouldn't knock out your Kangaskhan, so it should be a very, very easy victory. Now, Blue on the other hand is unbelievably difficult. The level cap jumps up to level 58, and if you see my team preview, you notice most of my Pokemon aren't anywhere close. So how are we going to level up? There are a bunch of trainers located around the overworld you can defeat, and I recommend doing that because battling the Elite Four is a huge, huge mistake. Like we saw in my first battle, we lost a Pokemon, and that tended to happen. My first really good attempt, I lost all my Pokemon just trying to level up for Blue and Red. It's just too risky. With a Monotype Nuzlocke, the Elite Four, even at level 50, is still very difficult, and you easily can lose Pokemon. And unlike before, leveling up will take a very long time because you've defeated almost every trainer that can give you a lot of experience points. The SS Aqua, however, you might have to change the clock, which is pretty easy to do, and you can battle the trainers there. They're much lower levels, so they don't give as much experience as the Elite Four, but they are far, far safer. You also can battle the rival before the Elite Four, who, while difficult, is just one trainer, and is also far, far safer. I do not recommend battling the Elite Four over and over again if you don't want to lose any Pokemon. Having said that, of course you know I'm an impatient guy, so I did battle the Elite Four. Now, if you level up Girafarig enough, Shadow Ball should one-shot almost everything, so it is a little bit easier, but you still can run into problems, and I did, having to clean up with Miltank. As for Koga, Clefable is a better Wigglytuff and can help sweep through the entire team, but I did need to switch into Kangaskhan in order to mop up here as well. The scariest trainer, however, is going to be Bruno. Now, with Psychic, Girafarig could theoretically sweep through the entire team, and it looks good right now. If Girafarig's Psychic is strong enough, the Elite Four really does come down to Lance luck, and thankfully it was strong enough, so that's good. Karen isn't too big a deal, so we don't really need to talk about her a second time, although Houndoom can still be kind of scary, and I almost lost Fearow, which would be not devastating, but definitely annoying. Now, Lance, on the other hand, as we saw, can be quite difficult, and we don't have a Pokemon to put Gyarados to sleep. So, the ideal strategy is to go with Clefable and use Thunder Punch in order to one-shot Gyarados and then Ice Punch to one-shot the Dragonite. Unfortunately, it wasn't a one-shot for me. I didn't know that. At least the Gyarados. The Dragonite thankfully were. At least the first one was, not the second one. And this is exactly why you don't battle the Elite Four. Because when something like this happens, you don't really have much you can do. You might lose Clefable here. And losing any one of these Pokemon would be kind of devastating. Flamethrower does a lot, and thankfully there are two leftovers in this game. One in Celadon, and one attached to Snorlax, which I do have as a backup. It is level 50, and that's kind of great. However, this last Dragonite that's level 50, you can see I want to run away because I'm worried I'm going to lose a Pokemon. And none of these Pokemon are ones I can afford to lose. So it uses Outrage, and there you go. It does half to Tauros. It uses Outrage again, and it does a good deal of damage to Kangaskhan. And now I have to be careful. We do knock it out, but if we didn't, we would have lost Kangaskhan. And this is exactly why you should not battle the Elite Four. Of course, since I won the first time, I battled them again and again. And did I lose any Pokemon? Well, I'm going to battle Blue. And the answer is no. I didn't. I battled them a lot of times, but I'm still only level 51. I led with Tauros because I've never beaten Blue before, and Tauros is a really good lead. I can't talk about consistency here. This was, I hope I win. Return did one-shot Alakazam. That was pretty sweet. I was hoping Surf would one-shot Rhydon. It didn't. It used Sandstorm, which deals 1/8 instead of 1/16 every turn. Gyarados is really scary, and I didn't want to lose Tauros. So I swapped into Clefable because it does know Thunder Punch. However, just like in the Lance battle you saw, I wasn't able to one-shot. Even though it's at level 57, it's actually the closest to being at the cap. And Gyarados got a crit. So Clefable could have fainted, and that would have been bad. Thankfully, I get my own crit and knock it out. Exeggutor is one of the least scary Pokemon, and we swap in Fearow, probably the most expendable Pokemon on my team. Thankfully, it goes for Egg Bomb and Leech Seed, which aren't too bad, and thus I was able to knock it out with Drill Peck. The final Pokemon is Arcanine, a very scary Pokemon. I go into Miltank, and Extreme Speed does nothing. I start going for Body Slam, and Flamethrower did way more than I was anticipating. And this is where I had to make a choice. All my Pokemon are pretty low HP. Something is going to get lost. What is the Pokemon I'm willing to lose? I unfortunately decided it was going to be Miltank, which sucked. But like we talked about, there are a lot of very useful Pokemon that fill different niches for Red. And even though I didn't want to lose Miltank, I didn't want to train up another bird. I do need a flying Pokemon for Red. See, Red's team consists of Pikachu, where you want a ground move, Espeon, where you want Girafarig, Snorlax, where you want something with good defense, although Miltank does fit that description, and frankly, Blissey can wall all the special Pokemon like Espeon, Venusaur, Blastoise, not Charizard because it knows Wing Attack. Fearow also walls Venusaur pretty well. The one good thing about Normal is although there aren't a lot of dual-type Pokemon, there are so many different Pokemon to choose from, I had too many options when trying to decide my team. So what team did I go with for my first ever battle versus Red? Well, and I turned on animations to make this more epic because I was so excited. I led with Tauros and went for Return, and at level 60, I outsped Pikachu. Yes, I'm at level 60. Espeon, I just stuck with Tauros because what do I have to lose? And we don't one-shot, unsurprisingly. We're 13 levels lower. Espeon went for Reflect, which is bad, but I was still able to knock it out. That's 2 down. Snorlax came out next, and I went for Curse. What does Curse do? It lowers my speed, but raises my attack and defense. Snorlax went for Amnesia, which is useless. I went for Return after Curse, and I actually did way more than I was anticipating. So I just went for Return again. And it's at half HP. Snorlax went for Body Slam, and Reflect faded. So I was able to knock out Snorlax. Tauros has now made it through 3 Pokemon. I haven't even been able to talk about the rest of my team yet. Venusaur charges up Solar Beam, and I go for Return. With Curse, I'm not outspeeding. And now, we can either swap into Fearow or Blissey. I swap into Fearow. I'm hit with Solar Beam. It does half, but I outspeed, knock it out with Drill Peck. Now it's likely going to send out Blastoise. It does because it knows Blizzard. But I have a swap in for that, Blissey. It is with Blizzard, and hopefully I don't get frozen. I don't. Of course, Blissey has leftovers. Blastoise goes for Rain Dance, and I go for Toxic. I'm going to try to stall this out. I also know Light Screen. Surf did quite a lot. I mean, I am only level 60, but I have Soft Boiled to restore HP. I have my leftovers, so we should be able to stall this out. Apologies if the frame rate gets a little choppy. I went back to 4 times speed because I could tell this was going to take a very, very long time. Thankfully, not only was able to knock out Blastoise, but he used Rain Dance, which is going to hurt Charizard, the final Pokemon. So I decide, okay, let's just go for Toxic. It goes for Wing Attack, deals a ton of damage, but Toxic does hit. Now, I decide to swap out because why lose anything? And in comes Kangaskhan. Wing Attack doesn't do that much damage, and Flamethrower is weakened because it's raining. I go for Return, and it deals decent damage, and then I swap back into Blissey to tank the next flamethrower. Now, the rain is stopped, it's gonna go for wing attack, but I can swap in Clefable to tank the wing attack, and the Toxic knocks it out. At level 60, a normal team was able to defeat the entirety of Pokemon Gold and Silver. In the end, nearly every Pokemon I had made an appearance, except for Girafarig, which I leveled up to 64 for Espeon. Turns out I didn't need it, Tauros just that good. But I was very, very pleased. I had been stuck on these runs for 3 weeks, and I was excited to try doing monotype runs with all the types in Gold and Silver, my favorite games growing up. I think I'm going to do a Psychic run next, but these videos haven't been performing as well as my other ones. I still want to make them because they're fun, but if you have any suggestions or you like the videos, leave a like, remember to subscribe, and honestly, any and all pointers will be helpful, unless you say, why don't you play like another player? Because I enjoy playing the way I do. It's just what I find fun. With all that said, thank you guys for watching, and take care.